This is Luke Turner, and this is episode 7 of Building a Web App from Scratch. Let's jump right into it. The first thing I'm going to do here is run our commands to get the app running. First we run the database, then we run our client bundler code, and then in a new terminal window I run the server. Okay, now one of the things we're going to need to think about today is what features we actually want to build for the app. And I have this notes file. I kind of wanted to talk about something when I'm thinking about what I'm going to work on next. A lot of times when you're working on an app that, is like a side project, something that you're ultimately planning on shipping, which is to say publishing on the internet, whatever that means to you, an important thing to remember is to focus on doing the pieces of work that are actually going to get you closer to shipping the app. And that's something that I wanted to take some notes on today. So let's actually break out this into two sections. What do I need to ship? And think about that a little bit. Let's actually open the app so we can get on the same page here. And kind of the reason that I like to think about it this way, what do I need to ship, is because it can be easy to, gold plate or whatever your app and to continuously refine the code to make it cleaner or add features that ultimately maybe are fun to build but don't necessarily matter to your users, whoever those might be. And by keeping in mind kind of the bare minimum, in startup terminology, there's this thing called the MVP, the minimum viable product. And that's basically what is the core functionality of your app that's actually delivering value. And a lot of times when you're building an app yourself, it can be easy to not focus on that and to build other things. And that kind of just slows down the whole process of building the app and makes it harder to ship. So thinking about what we need specifically to ship is a good starting point. Another kind of element with that is a lot of times the actual things that you need to build to ship, there's a reason that you haven't built them already. And sometimes that's because they're kind of annoying, or you don't really know how to do it, or it kind of gives you like an ugh feeling. And so if you don't make a deliberate effort to work on those aspects of the app, you're not necessarily going to actually push through that ugh feeling. And if you fall into that trap, it can be easy to never actually ship your app. So we're going to kind of try and avoid that here by deliberately keeping in mind what we need to build. So one thing is we have the ability to log exercises for today, right? Like I can add 12 dumbbell curls, 25 pounds, add. But what I can't do is I can't add exercises on any days other than today. The route is just today, and it just loads the date for today, and that's it. So one of the important features is to allow people to edit things from the past. Arguably not strictly required, but it feels like without that, the app is missing something significant. So let's put that on the list. Ability to edit sets on previous days. Obviously, we don't need to edit sets in the future. That wouldn't make sense. But today and days in the past. Okay, what else? Well, just viewing this on a given day, you can historically see, okay, if we do add that feature, I could go back 3 days and see what I did that day. But a lot of times what I want to be able to see is one exercise viewed longitudinally over the history of that exercise. Like for dumbbell press, or dumbbell curl, if I go to this exercise page, I'd like to be able to see a graph of all of my progress on this exercise over time. And, a table maybe as well, something where has the exact numbers. So that's another thing that we need. historical view for each exercise. What else do we need to ship? Well, we need a landing page. If I sign out here, this is what the user sees when they first get to this app. There's nothing here. We need something to motivate users to actually sign in and then start to use the app. A lot of times on landing pages, I like to put a screenshot of the app itself, maybe a description. It doesn't need to be fancy, but there should be at least a little bit of something. So that's another thing we can put on the list. Landing page. Let's sign back in. What else do we need? Well, we need settings. I've talked about this a bit before, but we need a settings page, and really it should have units, and it should also have the ability to export and delete your data. Now, exporting and deleting your data, arguably many users are not going to care about that, but it still feels like a core functionality in the app that I don't want to miss. The units, on the other hand, is something that probably most users are going to care about one way or the other, whether it's pounds, kilograms, etc. If it's not clear, then there's going to be ambiguity, and we kind of want to resolve that. And one of the final things that comes to mind, just looking at this, it's not pretty, is it? And the UI is, not only is it unpolished, but it's big. You know, it's not making effective use of space. If somebody views it in a mobile app, it kind of works. And we did test that last time. Like if I inspect this, you know, it does kind of work in a mobile setting, but it's not necessarily going to be easy to use because of what I perceive as, you know, ineffective use of white space. I like my app UI to be more compact. But in any case, basically having a decent UI, decent design. Okay. So to me, these start to feel like some of the main things that I want to build in order for this app to actually be able to ship. Once I do all these, you know, even if there's some other elements that I feel like I want to add, like more parameters or whatever, at least the core functionality is there. The app is useful. So, where do we want to start today? Well, I think it'll be valuable to start with this editing sets on previous days functionality. This can be kind of an interesting one. So let's dive into that. So first of all, let's look at the route we have for today. This is the controller that gets called when the user browses to the today route, which is what we have open here. Let's get rid of the responsive view. And as we can see, it's getting the day just like this. What we want the user to be able to do is we want them to be able to specify a date in the URL. And then we'll also have like a date chooser or like back and forward buttons that the user can use to browse back and forth through their history. So let's think about how we want to do that. For starters, this route is no longer just going to be a single string called today. Now we could leave this route the same and build a new route for like slash some date. But really the logic for them is almost entirely the same. The only difference is how the date is parsed from the URL. So instead of creating a new route, we're just going to update this existing route. I feel like that's the best way to go. And basically this would be like :date. And then we get this date. from the rec.params object. And let's log that. So now if I refresh the page here, the date is today. Simple. There's a couple things going on here though to note. One is like if I now go to /exercises, I wonder what's going to happen there. Look at that. It's actually rendering the today page with a date of exercises. And the reason for this is we have this parameter, which can take on any value, and it's basically shadowing the routes defined below it. Any other route where it's like /something is going to match this route first. So there's a couple things we could do here. Simple one is we could move this to the bottom of the basically this code file, like define this route after the other ones so that it doesn't shadow them. Or we can use a regex, and let's look up the syntax for that. Express. So when you're defining a route in Express, you can, use that colon thing to define a parameter. And you can also define a regex that indicates what can go in that parameter. And that's also useful because that way, if the user doesn't put a valid date in there, they're not actually going to get to the date route. So we can see that here. And let's see what the syntax is for like this. Append a regular expression in parentheses. So let's try that. So the date, this is going to be either, it's going to be either the string today. There we go. Either the string today, or it's going to be a date. And we can just do the date in a consistent format here. There's no need to have it be localized really. So that would be like 4 digits, and then a dash, and then 2 digits, and then a dash, and then 2 digits. And so with that, this is like, for example, year, month, date. This is January 1st, 2020. So let's see if that is working how we expect here. So now if I go to /exercises, we're taken to the exercises page because the today route doesn't match anymore. If I go to today, it does match. If I put in a date, it doesn't seem to match. Oh, for some reason my slashes got eliminated. I think what happens, let's try this. If I just do 1/ and save, that slash got wiped out by my formatter because it's actually just escaping the D, which doesn't need to be escaped. So I think I need to do double slashes here, is what that's kind of telling me. Now if I refresh the page, it's working. And the date that we get here is that. But we can also see, the actual date that the page is using isn't that. So we need to start pulling that into our code and actually using this new date parameter. So first of all, this today, we're going to rename to date. So let's do that this way, I guess. Date. And instead of doing this, we're going to do something like rec.params.date today. If the date is today, then we're going to do this thing. Otherwise, we're going to just set it to rec.params.date. Okay, so now if I go over here, if I refresh the page, the date is actually that. one thing we're noticing here is the formatting for this is different because here we're using, the ISO formatting, whereas if the date is today, it's using the locale-based formatting. So that's something we should probably fix. And I think we could do that with like a new date here, .toLocale date string. Let's see what this looks like. If I do this, we get the date. This is actually a really interesting illustration here, though. Somehow our date ended up being wrong. And this has to do with time zones. I'll get to that in a moment. But basically, what we're actually going to want to do is something a little bit more like this. Is that going to work, I wonder? Maybe not. Maybe we're going to have to do it more like this. Date. If it's today, then new date. Otherwise, new date rec.params.date. And then this whole thing can be localified. Okay, that's working. And really, we kind of want to keep this date as an object here. So let's maintain the date. And then we can do like const date string equals that. And today would be date string. And the reason we want to keep this date separate is just in case we want to do some other parsing on it or what have you. And this get sets for date, I guess would be date string, fine. So let's talk about the reason that our date is wrong here. Kind of the problem with the JavaScript dates is that it's really a timestamp. And because the JavaScript dates don't actually have a time zone associated with them, when the timestamp is parsed into a locale, it can sometimes be problematic. And I'm not exactly even sure. Like if we do like date.toString, see what that has to say. So we can see this is 1600 at GMT minus 8 Pacific Standard Time. So this date.toString is interpreting the date object as though it's in my time zone because I'm at GMT minus 8. So what should we do about that? Well, that's a good question. I actually don't know if there's a good way to deal with this with the built-in JavaScript date library. And that's part of one of the reasons that I tend to like to pull in a like an actual separate library for managing dates. And usually I like to use Luxon. Let's actually see though, I'm kind of curious if we can find anything interesting about date, where we could maybe, like when we call toString or toDateString. So it mentions here it's interpreted in the local time zone. There doesn't appear to be a way to override that. Is there a way to set the local time zone? I don't know. I wonder if this, let's see what this does. Yeah, so that's still, so that's actually has the right date for that. The problem is the toLocale date string, where it's actually generating a date. I don't think there's like a toUTC date or anything like that. So this is kind of an example of where the date UI is sort of limiting us here. We could parse out the individual values from the date is one thing we could maybe do. Like we could say date dot get day, like get year. Let's do this. And really, I just kind of want to experiment with this to avoid pulling in a whole nother library. Date.get month, UTC month, maybe. And date.get day, UTC day, maybe. I wonder what the get UTC date one does. What does this do? Day of the month. What is day then? Day of the week. So we want day of the month. So let's see what this date string looks like now. Or no, let's do console.log. Refresh. We get a crash. What's the problem? Field value out of range, 2019-01. So this might have to be get UTC full year, first of all. Now the date is correct, but we have 0 for the UTC month, which I believe is probably because that's actually a 0 indexed value. Let's see what this has to say. Yeah, a 0 based value. So we actually need to add 1 to that in order, when we're composing our date string here. And get UTC date. Refresh. Is, I guess, not 0 indexed. Is that right? One of them is 0 indexed, one of them is not. Yeah. Okay. So, we're kind of building this functionality. Again, kind of the ideal thing here normally is like if you're using something like moment, for example, if we look at our datetime docs, there's like a to format string or something like that. And like this is an example of a thing where you can use a formatting syntax to cause the library to generate these strings for you using the specific format that you want. And that's usually a better option if you're really trying to build something robust. But for now, I'm just going to go with this approach. The problem with this approach is we have these strings where it's like not 0 padded. So we have like get UTC month plus 1. In this case, it's a 1. But really, that should be like a 0, 1. And it doesn't necessarily matter, except when we start to use these strings in other ways. Like if we wanted to pass this back into the date constructor, let's just log this as well. And then this would be like new date string. Does this work, I wonder? Refresh the page. Does work. So, I mean, we could leave it at that. The only problem then really is that this part of the UI is not, it just looks a little funny to not have the 0 padded things. So, yeah, maybe I'll just make a little utility function here, and I can move this someplace else. But for now, I'm just going to write it right in line. Pad. And so this would take like a value and a, well, this value could be a number. I wonder if there's a function for this already. Not sure. And so this is just going to pad it to 2 digits because I'm not going to want to make it as generic as it could be. So we would be like, if value less than 10, then return 0 value, return value. Should be fine. So now if we pad these, let's see if that's kind of going to do what we want. Refresh. Okay, so now we have our formatted date. And if I do something like 12 here, that also works. Cool. Let's get rid of some of these console logs. Okay, so now we have the date. This date string is being passed into getSetsForDay, which is a little bit backwards maybe. Normally you would be passing in the actual date object, not the string, but that's okay. If we actually look at this function, it's using the date string directly against the database, which is kind of what we want here. So instead of having the date object that has to be parsed into a string by the ORM and then passed to Postgres, and that might not be parsing it correctly into the string. It might be just using .toString, which as we saw has problems. We're passing in the date string itself, which is a format that Postgres already knows how to deal with. And it's going to give us the correct values. Okay, so let's make sure that we're kind of handling this date correctly everywhere. So we know getSetsForDay is using the day, and we could check that by, like, say, going to, well, let's actually put a pause on that for a moment. The other thing we need to make sure is that when we're actually creating new sets, that's also using the date instead of just assuming it's today. So, for example, in this log and exercise section, this date value today, okay, that looks good. So like 2020-01-12, if I log a dumbbell curl, let's open the network tab. We should see that the sets is using that 2020-01-12 date. We also see that we got redirected back to today, which isn't really what we want. We got to fix that. But if we go back to this date, we can see the exercises on that date. Cool. And, you know, maybe we don't want to call this today anymore is one thing as well, especially this title should probably be date string at least. To actually rename the view kind of feels unnecessary. I like the today mnemonic here, even if the actual date is not really today. Could kind of fix that later, but for now I think we're good. So let's fix the redirecting issue as well. So kind of the problem here, if we look back, if we go to one of these days, add. So the first thing this is doing is it's posting to this sets route. And then the sets route is programmed to redirect back to today. Now, okay, that's fine. But we actually want this to redirect back to some date. The date that the exercise was created. And luckily we actually have that as a parameter in the body right here. So every time a set is created, it's going to have this parameter, and we just want to redirect back to this value in the URL. So if we do this now, dumbbell curl, 3, 2, 1, add, it redirected us back to the correct date. Cool. But there's another type of thing you can do here where if you edit and submit that, that's taking us back to today again, which is not what we want. Also, I'm noticing that this is actually has gotten us back to the today, whereas we wanted to do something more like this. Let's do this. If I do dumbbell curl, add, yeah, it's adding it and keeping me on the proper date. If I edit, it's taking me back to today. So let's fix that. So the edit one is this post/id. And here's another case where we're just going to want this to redirect to /date. But in this case, the date is not actually coming in from the body. It's going to be a property on the exercise. So this would be like exercise dot, or not on the exercise, on the set. So we're kind of going to need to get the set or include the date as a parameter here, which would be fine, but I'm actually just going to get the set for now. So const updated set equals, oh wait, do we have a sets, like get sets per day, but we don't have get set by ID. So I'm just going to write it in here. db.query, or no, well, that would work, but select sets table, or no, select from, eventually I'll get used to this drizzle ORM, sets table, where, and we would do something like this again. The other thing is maybe this has like a returning. Maybe that's a better way to do it actually. Let's see what that returns for us. Returning, not every database supports that, but updated set. And this would be like updated set.date. Oh, so this is possibly an array. So if we did something like this, for now, this is going to produce an error if there actually was no set that matched. But that should only happen if somebody's trying to update a set that doesn't exist, and there's really no way to avoid some kind of error happening there. So it's not prettiest, but should work. So now if we update this to something else, we submit that, and yeah, we get redirected back to the correct page. Then there's also deleting. And deleting, so for deleting, I don't think there is a returning clause at all. I'm kind of curious to see what this has to say for itself if I try it though. Deleted sets. Let's see if we get anything back. So if I try to delete one of these sets, it actually did return it. So that's convenient. So we can do the same logic that we have here, except this would be deleted sets. Okay, so now we've got to go back to our testing date here. And if we delete one of these, we're redirected back to the same page. Okie doke. Pretty simple. Basically, we're refactoring this whole flow to allow you to use any date instead of just today. And let's see, I probably have a bunch of consoles spread around in here. Let's just get rid of all of these. That one we actually want. Okay. So there's one other thing here as well, which isn't necessarily super important, but suppose I click on today. Suppose I take this, well, let's just do it this way. So if I log a new exercise and add, the URL has actually updated to the explicit date for today, not /today anymore. And that's fine. It's not like there's something really wrong with that, but if a user is paying attention, that might be confusing. And if they say, wait until tomorrow, reopen their phone and like refresh the page, it's actually still going to be the date of the day before. It's not going to update automatically to today. And so kind of what I want to do for that is have a piece of logic in here where it's like, if basically we're going to do something like this. If date is not today, or sorry, if date is today, then we're going to actually redirect the user to /today. And, you know, again, you could argue whether or not this is necessary. I'm actually going to put that above this here database call. We don't really need to, let's put this down here. Don't really need to do any database calls if we're just going to redirect. And so then the problem is, what is this today? Well, that would just be like a new date dot to UTC. I mean, it would be this logic here again. So like if I do const to UTC or to date string, I don't know. Doesn't really matter what we call it. If we make this a function that accepts a date, and it's going to return this, then we can kind of reuse that logic. And again, you know, defining these functions right in here is a little odd. Normally these would go in some kind of a utility library, and maybe I'll do that. But not right now. So we've got our toDate string. So if date, and we're going to do the date string bit, const date string equals to date string date. Then we can get rid of this. And we can say const today equals to date string new date. And this would be date string. So, I mean, there's probably a better way to do this, I'm sure. But if it works, right? Okay, so now we're getting an infinite loop. Not a huge fan of that. So what's the problem there? The problem is we need to also check if rec.params.date is not already today. Right? So now if I go today, if I try and add a new exercise, or let's try and delete an exercise here. So we deleted, we got redirected to the URL where it actually has the date of today, and then we got redirected again to the actual today. Kind of awkward, but you know, it's okay. I could update this redirecting logic in all these places to like figure that out here to only do one redirect, but again, not going to really worry about that right now. I will actually take this toDate string and make a utility function for that. So usually I like to have kind of like a little util.ts file for my utility functions. Going to put these in there. And export this one. And I'm not going to export pad because that's specifically designed only to work with toDate string. And I don't want to accidentally use it in other contexts. Then we update this import. Okay. Let's make a commit with these changes. So what have we done? We've updated this route to accept a date, which could be either today or, a date string. We parse that out. We use that when we're getting sets. We update our redirects. Nothing too special. And then we add the utility function helper. Support editing or support viewing dates other than today. Okay. But one of the things we don't have still is a way for users to actually get to those past dates, right? Like I've been editing the URL manually, but users aren't going to do that. They want something to click or something to choose. And so a simple example here is we could have like back and forward buttons. So that's probably what I'll start with here. Let's open the view for today. So we could put it right up alongside the title here for now. And this would be basically, again, I'm not really sure how to do this with Pug, but basically we would have like a button to go back and a button to go forward. Let's just start with mocking out what that looks like. Maybe we could do like a little arrow type of thing. And, I might just, let's see if that works for the forward. Yeah, so button back, button forward. Also, I didn't indent it underneath the H1. And kind of the problem here now that we're seeing is this today is not being interpreted. Is it like that? Yeah, okay. So now we kind of have these back and forward. I mean, obviously it doesn't look good at all, but that's okay for now. And really, I guess we should make these links like A, because that's all they're doing is linking to a different URL. And this would be like the previous day's URL. And then this would be like the next day's URL. And this one we could just say like if today we don't really have a good way of telling in the view yet if it actually is today. So let's just add that as well. So like here we would say, we could put a little Boolean up here, const is today equals rec.params.date equals today. Then we can also use that here. And we can also pass that in here. And so then when the date is today, it shouldn't show the forward. Or wait, I got that backwards. So this would be if not is today. Kind of the idea is we don't want people to actually have the option to move forward into the future. It just doesn't make sense. And for the past one, we're going to have to redirect to the like slash yesterday. And then this would be like slash tomorrow. And we're going to have to send those values into the view. Did I spell that right? Hopefully. So we're going to need a yesterday and a tomorrow. So how do we want to get that? Well, we've got this date, right? And so what we can do is say like yesterday equals to date string date dot set set date sets the numeric day of the month. Yeah. Except we want to use set UTC date. Is that a thing? Yeah. Set UTC date date.get UTC date -1. So really this would be like, I could say like yesterday. So what does this return? Returns a number and it mutates the date. I probably should be making a new date for this. Let's see if this works though. Problem? Oh, right. I forgot to do tomorrow. So let's say yesterday equals new date, and then yesterday. And then we could do the same kind of thing for tomorrow. Tomorrow is a new date. And we're doing this because, this set is mutating the date object. So we don't really want to mutate the date for today. We want to mutate a brand new object. And then this is complaining about the fact that these are using the same variable name in two places. Not supposed to do that. So yesterday is yesterday string. Tomorrow is tomorrow string. And, we can maybe kind of separate these out a little bit so it's easier to read what's going on. And does that work the way that we want? Reload. So now if I click on this, it's not doing exactly what I expect. Where is this link trying to go? It's trying to go to today still. Oh, yeah, because this is not the right date being passed into toDate string. And really, again, like maybe I could use a helper function for some of this, but not going to worry about it at the moment. We shouldn't need this logic in very many places. So now if I click this, it's taking me back, and I can click this and go forward, ? Tomorrow. Oh, there should be +1, of course. So I can go forward up to today, and then I can't go forward anymore. And I can go back. And if I go back like to 0101, for example, I should be able to click back, and even though we're doing set UTC date, it's automatically going to update the month and year instead, I believe. Yeah. So it works fine over month and year boundaries. Okay. So, again, maybe not the prettiest code, but we're focused on what's getting us closer to shipping. And this works well enough. Add buttons or links to go today or yesterday and tomorrow. Okay. So, just as an example, say I'm a user, I did some exercises yesterday and I realize I want to update that. I can go back one day, add something, and then edit that thing, And then I can also delete that thing. And then I can go forward back to today. Cool. So that's pretty much that particular feature done. Now, again, it's not really pretty. Like these buttons here, these links, they don't really look like what we want them to look like in the long run, but they work all right. One other thing we might eventually want is like a date chooser where the user can pick a date, say they forgot about something they want to log a month ago. They don't want to click this 30 times. And they don't understand the idea of editing the URL because we don't expect users to think about that. They could have like a date chooser to be like, okay, go to date, whatever. Maybe even have this itself be like clickable. And if the user clicks it, it pops up like a chooser. But we're not going to worry about that quite yet. I will add that as a next action though, maybe. Allow user to choose arbitrary dates in the past instead of clicking back a bunch of times. But for now, we're going to say that we did the task. So what else? I mean, the simple thing to do would be to just go through this list. Historical view for each exercise. That's another thing that we know we need to add. So we go manage exercises, go here. We want something on this page. Okay, so that is under /exercises, or no, /exercises/ID, this page here. So basically we want to get a list of all the sets for this exercise. And maybe we could set an upper bound where it's like in the last year, say. Let's actually make a function for this. I feel like this could be useful as a helper function. So it would be like get sets for exercise. And actually I'm thinking, yeah, okay, we don't really have that here. This is one where it could really fit into either model. We're technically getting sets, so it makes sense to put it in the sets model file, but you could also view it as loading all of the sets associated with a given exercise, which kind of would make sense to go in the exercises model file. So we really just have to choose one way or the other. Not a big deal. This would be like exercise ID, which is a number because it just is for some reason. Exercise ID. And then we could also have like a starting date. And so what we're doing here is we want to get an exercise, all sets for this user and this exercise, and where I believe greater than equal to sets table.date starting date. Something like that. And the starting date, I mean, so basically I'm imagining there might be times where we don't want to specify any starting date at all. But for now, I'm just going to assume that there's always some kind of starting date here. Or maybe I could do this, like say, well, no, this seems fine. Okay, so let's go ahead and call this and see how that goes. So const historical sets equals await get sets for exercise. And this again. So really like this should be maybe put right in here. And then we can reuse that ID value instead of having to parse it. in both places, user.id, and starting date. Okay. So, and then let's just pass this into the view before we forget. So what is the starting date? How do we calculate that? Well, what I kind of want to do now is actually take these things and put them into like a helper function. So that's what I'm going to do. So let's take this, make a new util function, and we could call it like export const relative date string. Sure, I don't know. Date number new date. And you know, I'm thinking about this now. I'm like, I don't know if this actually mutates the date, I guess. Maybe it does. I'm just going to assume that it does. And then we're going to return let's just do it like this. We can decouple that idea of getting the relative date with the idea of converting it to a string. Plus num. Okay, so let's update our index function to actually use that. So instead this would be like relative, what is it called? Relative date. Relative date, date -1. And then we can actually get rid of this bit. And then tomorrow is the same thing, but +1, which is just 1. Okay, so that should work. Let's double check that that is working. If we go back to today. Yep. And now we can reuse that logic down here to calculate starting date, which would be relative date, new date, and then say -30. And then this would be toDate string. Okay, so now this is getting the last 30 days. We could do like -365, you know, get a bigger number. If we go manage exercises, dumbbell curl, let's log oops. What we've got here. Okay, so we've got all of our historical sets. Going back to the beginning of time because I haven't been working on this app for over a year. Okie doke. So now the question becomes, what do we want to do with these? I'm going to start with a table. Table is the simplest option. And then I will want to add a kind of a graph, a plot. But in order to add a plot, I'm going to need to add a plotting library. That's not something that I want to implement myself. And for now, I mean, this page is not organized. We're just going to put it at the bottom. And we're going to do a table. Table. And inside that, there's going to be a T body. And inside that, we're going to say each set of historical sets. We're going to do a TR, a table row. And let's do set.id just to see what this looks like. Okay, so now we have a table where, we have our set IDs, but really that's not what we want to show here. What we want is more like each, well, let's start with like set.date. And then we're going to want a column for each of the parameters that the set has. So we would do like each param of set dot params. But the thing is, actually, we want to do of probably exercise dot parameters so that it's consistently ordered. And then we would have a TD where it's the set dot parameters param dot ID kind of thing. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so we're getting that. We could kind of add a heading to this table to make it a little bit more clear what's going on. So the first column is date, and then we're going to do something like this again. But in this case, it's just going to be param.name. See what this looks like. Okay. And you can see kind of why for this, we don't want to iterate over the set.parameters because sometimes it might not even be specified. And then that would cause a table to just get all messed up. Now we need to make it actually look like a table. And because of our CSS reset, the CSS normalizer that Bulma pulls in automatically, we really need to use the classes for it to look even remotely like a table at all. Table class table. Is that all there is to it? Yeah, pretty much. Now we've got this table. And we can also, like you'll notice these are all in a weird order. So we're going to want to sort these. And we could sort them in the view, but I feel like it makes more sense to sort them here. Also, I didn't really pay attention to this, but we don't need this at all. We could just return sets because we already know the exercise. They're all the same exercise. And then also, instead of ordering it by order, we're going to order by date and then order. Can I do that? What's the error here? I wonder if it's possible to order by two things. The date is the most important one, but then within each date, it's possible that there's multiple sets, these two sets. And in that case, it would be nice if we respected the order for those two sets. So it does work, but we just need, so this is using the query UI, first of all. So this would be like an array, perhaps. Ascending sets.date, and then ascending sets.order. And so now this one should be before this one, assuming that they're in that order, which if we actually look at today, 321 comes before 123. Yeah. Could just be luck, but I think we can assume that that's actually working. So now we've got, a simple historical view here. Let's actually commit this. This is basically add table of historical sets in the exercise page. Pretty simple. Quick time check, about halfway through the session. I think we have time to consider pulling in a graphing library. So this is something I don't really have a good pre-existing opinion on. I've heard of some of these. High chart I've heard of, but this one costs money, right? It's probably a bit excessive as well. Well, Plotly could work. Let's see what the code looks like. So we kind of are going to want to do a line chart here. I think. So one of the things that I'm thinking about here is what I actually want this to look like. Because this chart is maybe a little bit more complicated than just a pure line chart or line plot. Basically, you've got your X and your Y axis, right? The Y axis is going to be the value of the parameter. And we'll probably need to have either a separate plot within the same chart or a whole separate chart for each parameter. But then also on the x-axis, I think each element, like each value in the x-axis, should be a date. But it's possible to have more than one set on a given date. And in that case, I don't think we want that date to be expanded in the x-axis or anything like that. What we should do is have those dots, like a dot for each value of each set on that date, just vertically in that single x-axis spot, if that makes sense. And then have a line which connects the highest of those values over time. So you could see, well, I did 3 sets of dumbbell curls, 10 reps, 15 reps, and then 20 reps. And then the next day I did 12 reps, 15 reps, and 22 reps. And all 3 of those dots would show up on top of each other for each day, vertically aligned. And then the line would connect to the 20 and the 22, the highest, your maximum for that day. That way you could kind of see over time as your maximum increases or decreases, but you can also see those other warm-up sets or whatever they might be. And, if that's too complicated, we could start with just only showing the highest for each day. But it would be nice if we could show all of them. So let's kind of take a look at this one. I feel like chart.js is one that I've maybe even used in the past, long, long ago. But I kind of want to see, how flexible these are and how easy it would be to implement that kind of chart that I'm talking about. So we can see with chart.js, basically we configure the chart. This setup code is basically just generating the sample data set, it looks like, so we don't really need to copy this at all. But it illustrates the structure that we would expect the data sets to have. And then let's look at the docs here and see what we can actually specify more comprehensively. So show line is an option. So we could have things where show line is false to just generate the dots. Let's actually just give it a shot here. I wonder if this has some kind of explorer. Not really, but that's all right. So what we have set up is we have a bundler, which we've set up for the better auth library. So we can do things where it's like importing these dependencies from like node modules, and that will work. So we should be able to use that approach for chart.js as well. I wonder what this step-by-step guide has to say for itself. It's cube. Oh, okay. So basically we're going to install chart.js. Let's close this. Install, save chart.js. And so now that's adding this as a dependency here. Technically, I guess this could be a dev dependency now that I'm thinking about it. But whatever, this is fine. It's a dev dependency because it's only being used when we're building the client-side bundle. So it's needed by the app, but it's not actually needed by the server that's running the app. It's just needed by the client-side code. But for now, this is fine. I can clean these up later. Better auth is another example where it's actually better auth is needed for both, I think, server and client. Anyway, so with that, if we go over here, I'm actually going to rename this because it's not really just about auth anymore. I'm going to call it main.js. And then I'm going to update my builder here, main.js. And then I'm going to rerun that piece of code. Okay, let's actually first commit this. Usually when I'm adding a dependency, I like to commit that in its own commit and not this part. What happened here? It didn't uncommit those, unstage me. Okay, that time it worked. Okay, so all we're doing is adding the chart.js dependency. And then I'm going to do a specific commit for this as well. So that way those changes, are kind of decoupled from and don't mess up the diff or whatever for actually adding the charting code in here, which is kind of the next step. So for instance, Suppose I do... Suppose I just copy this directly and get it set up, and then we can start building my own charting stuff in the mix here. So chart, and then this function here, we actually don't want to call it right away though, so we're just going to export it. Export async function, build historical chart, or build, just call it build chart, doesn't really matter. Okay, and then we're putting that on the window object here because I don't know a better way to do that. And then this is going to require us to have this acquisitions. I'm going to call this sets chart. And then in the exercise page, we're going to need to add that canvas in here. Let's do it on top of the table. And based on the example here, we can see that it's just like a canvas with that ID and a div with an explicit width, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if we need that. Canvas, sets chart. And let's see what this looks like for starters. Oh, got to restart my server. Okay. Okay, so I mean, there's something. The canvas is there. So now we need to have something where when this canvas is loaded, we actually call that little function. I wonder if I guess the simplest way to do that for now is just with a script. Or no, that's not. Script, and then inside that script, we're going to have window.exercise tracker.build chart. Let's see what this does now. Okay, it's not happy with that. There we go. Okay. And we can kind of see why it has the width on here because it's just taking up the whole horizontal width. So if we wanted to make the chart a little bit smaller, we could do that, but this is actually fine for now. We can deal with that later. And kind of as an explanation here, I guess, part of the thing is like if I'm in Pug, say I'm in Pug and I do this, this is actually, pardon me, actually going to run this code on the server, which isn't what we want. It's going to run it as part of compiling the template. What we want is for this to be a string that happens to be JavaScript, and that string is going to run on the client. Okay. In any case, we've got this going on. And so now what we can do is we can pass in the exercises to this. So here we actually are going to start to want it to do something like this. String. And what we're passing in here is historical sets. Let's just pass them all in. And we're also going to want probably to pass in the list or the exercise itself so that we can get those parameters. So let's do that as well. In fact, let's make that the first parameter here. So exercise. And again, we're kind of building this JavaScript for the client to execute, which is a little awkward, but fine. So now what happened? We get an error, unexpected identifier object, right? So I have to JSON.stringify these, kind of annoying. Now refresh. What now? Okay, let's look at what is in this script here. Something not quite right, it looks like. So we kind of have the idea. The problem is that it's escaping all of the quotes for some reason. And this is probably a pug thing. Let's see if there's a thing for doing like a raw. Unescaped, I think is what I want. So that would be like that. Okay, so now when we're calling build chart, we can see that it's being called with the exercise as the first parameter, and then the array of sets as the second parameter, in theory. Yeah, it starts there. Or no, that's the parameters. It starts here. And so kind of the idea then is over here, this function is going to get the exercise and the sets. And we can use that to construct our data to actually display in the chart. This is just a way of passing that data from the client or from the server to the client by converting it into a JSON object and embedding it right into the script. Okay. So here, if we switch this type to line, what does that do now? Pretty much what we expect. So we can have our data sets be, maybe I'll do one data set per parameter and see how that works. Let's see. Okay, so to do that, we would be like const datasets equals exercise dot parameters dot map param. And this is going to return something that looks like this. So it's going to return label param dot name. And data is going to be sets dot map set dot parameters param dot id kind of thing. So now let's log this. And then we can also pass it into here. Okay, I mean, we're getting something. We can see that we have these data sets. And the data in them is pretty much what we would expect. Sometimes it's undefined. If the set doesn't have that parameter specified on that given day, or with that given, that set. And other times it's, a string, but that doesn't seem to be a problem. And the y-axis, or the x-axis here is interesting. It's doing it by year for some reason. We're definitely going to want to reconfigure that. This data, I don't think we need anymore, right? Oh, and I guess So I guess the labels here is the x-axis, maybe? Yeah. And then we can see we have these like duplicate things here. So this is going to be a bit of a problem that we might want to resolve. Another thing is the y-axis for these different parameters is potentially going to be distinctly different. And so what we can do, and ultimately we'll see if this ends up looking weird. We want to separate it out. But I think there was a thing for multi-axis. Is it possible to have more than just two axes? I wonder. Probably. So this is under options. Options. Oh, hey, it gives me some autocomplete here. That's nice. Axes. Or no, scales. And then for each scale, so scales is like an object where it's going to need one property on each object per parameter. So this would be something like exercise.parameters.reduce scales param, and with a default value of an object. And this is going to be like scales param.id equals something, and then return the scales. And what this is going to be, type, for now we'll just do type linear, display true, and position left. Let's see what that looks like. Okay. Well, as expected, it's a bit of a mess, but it does seem to kind of be working, I think. So like what we're seeing here is so kind of the other thing though is we need to actually assign the values of the data sets to the axes or something like that, right? Because it's not quite doing that part properly. So like if we look at the data, what is the data here? Yeah, so y-axis ID, this is a property we need to put on there. And so that would be up here, y-axis ID, param.id. Okay, so now we have our different y-axes. And you might say this looks a real mess. And it does. But normally, we would only have a few of these checked off. So let's, for example, uncheck all of these. And now there's just reps and weight, which is like two parameters, which would, for a dumbbell curl, this would be what you would expect, reps and weight. And it's still pretty difficult to read, actually. But if you think about it, it's really difficult to actually combine these into one plot to begin with. In the sense that like, it would be nice if there was just one line that somehow combined reps and weight together. Like you could multiply reps times weight, but that doesn't really tell the user all the information that they need to know. And it only really makes sense for reps times weight. You can't really do that if it's like duration times weight. I mean, you could, but it becomes increasingly strange. So what I'm going to do instead is actually just split this into different charts. It does feel like the best option. Now, I don't know if there's like a subchart function in chart.js, like where you can have multiple charts in the same canvas. So instead, I'm just going to actually have multiple canvases for now. And again, we're going to do for each param, there's going to be a canvas, and the ID is chart plus param.id, chart dash plus param.id, say. And so then when we're actually building these charts, we're going to iterate over all of the parameters and do a separate chart for each. And I feel like this is going to work better than trying to have multiple parameters on the same chart. So we're not going to need these. Just comment that out for now. And the data sets is actually just going to be this. There's not going to be multiple data sets. So we don't need that either. We don't need the y-axis ID. So now what do we got? Got an error. Data sets is not defined. Oh yeah, don't need that console log. What now? Cannot read property of null reading ID. Oh, yeah. So probably that's actually this. So this would be chart dash param.id, right? Okay, so now we've got our reps, we've got our weight, they're in separate plots, and it kind of makes it easier to read. And if we check off another one, then that is going to go in its own plot here. Intensity, it doesn't know what to do with that because the y-axis is not numeric. And so that's another thing that we're going to need to figure out. So let's actually just figure that out now. Do a quick time check. 134 seems okay. So options, scales, y, type, and basically what this is going to be will depend on the type of this parameter, the data type. So let's actually look at the chart.js docs here a little bit and see what we can put in for our options for the scales. Axis scales. So type ticks. Hmm. Hmm. So it's not really Cartesian and it's not really radial. Category. I think this is probably what I would want. So scales, type, category, and then labels would be the possible values for intensity, which is low, medium, and high. Let's try that. So if we say if parameters dot or param dot data type equals intensity, then type is category. Oh, I got autocomplete. That could have helped. And then labels are low, low, medium, high. And if it's not intensity, then this is just going to be type linear. See what that does now. Okay, so now intensity, I mean, they're in completely the opposite order though. It should be high, medium, low. Will this fix that? Yeah. Okay. So that seems fine. Another type that we might have though is like duration. But we haven't really figured out the data types for these to begin with. Like if somebody puts in a number for duration, like let's go back to today for a moment. Let's check all of these off. If we go to today, if I want to fill in a duration here, this is just a numeric input. And really duration should be more of a time span. So if the user puts in a number, it's not clear, is this the number in milliseconds, seconds, minutes, hours, etc.? We don't know. And until we actually figure out how units work, we're not going to know. So for now, it's fine to just treat that as a linear value, I think. And again, these charts are not pretty. I don't know why weight and assisted weight look like they're the same. Maybe they just are the same, but I feel like they shouldn't be. We've got our parameters, weight, assisted. The data type is the same. If we look at this other thing now, parameters, weight assisted, weight assisted. Maybe I just always filled them out the same, but I don't think so. Let's try something. Let's go today. Dumbbell curl. If I set the weight here to 1, 2, 3, and the assisted to 3, 4, 5, now they're definitely different, right? Yeah. And then if I go back to manage, dumbbell curl, weight and assisted, okay, they are different. So I guess I just happen to have filled those two things out the same. Yeah. Okie doke. Let's go ahead and commit what we've got here. Actually, let's get rid of these comments. I don't think we are going to go back to that multi-axis view. It was just too unwieldy. Okay. Render charts for each parameter. Quick time check here. 20 minutes left. Okay, so we've got these charts. Again, they work. Are they pretty? No, that's something we're going to have to figure out. But to me, that's kind of all part of this. If we go back to the notes here, it's kind of all part of this design and UI patterns thing. Like how these charts render, the chart is actually basically rendering fine. The problem is that the container that it's in is not constraining its size at all, and it's not organizing the layout on the page in a way that's easy for the user to scroll through. We just get these big charts. But that's more to do with that container than with the charts themselves. Okay, so we can actually just check this off for now. Historical view, let's say that's done. Okie doke. So the other big one that I wanted to get into is the units, but we're not really going to have time to make a whole new page in 20 minutes, I think. So I'll just do a little bit on the landing page instead, maybe. Although I'm thinking about that and I'm like, the landing page is not going to take me 20 minutes. So maybe it's going to be a little too little, but that's okay. And the other thing about the landing page is a lot of times that doesn't really follow the exact UI of the rest of the app. Basically, do I have my Bulma thing open anymore? No. Basically, like a lot of times the landing page is a content-focused page, whereas the rest of the app is often more of a rich, interactive web app type of experience. And the way that those actually look and the way that you build the layout can sometimes differ between the two. They might have the same high-level container, but, different structure of the page. Which is all to say that, we can kind of start polishing the landing page a little bit without figuring out the UI for the rest of the app quite yet. So let's spend a little time on that maybe. So first of all, we know we want a title in the landing page. There should be something more big than just, let's sign out, than just this, right? We want a proper title. And I feel like there's some kind of brand component that maybe we could use in here, like a hero, do they call it? Yeah, a hero banner. Not sure if this is actually what we want though. But let's just do it for now. So this is a section class hero. And then inside that is a hero body. And then inside that is a title and a subtitle. What does that look like? Okay, I mean, we've got something. What happens, let's try making it a different color here, like primary. Yeah, so that kind of works. It shows the layout of the page. You can see that it's limited to the width of the container. And it shrinks as the container shrinks. Ultimately, it does just look a little weird though. this is interesting. I don't know. But basically, we kind of need to figure out what we actually want to put on this page as well before we can style it too much. So let's just start with this for now, and then we can do a section. Section dot section. And then something like h1 dot title. Features. And then I think we could do like a just a simple list, right? Like if I do an unordered list. Kind of works. I sort of want to style that list where it actually has the list elements on it though. I think content would do that for us. Like that, does that work? Or do I need to put it on a parent element? I might need a parent element. Let's see how this looks. Okay, kind of okay. And I feel like this, I almost want this to be more of a warning header. Let's look back at the hero here. Is warning. And we'll just get rid of this whole warning header when we're actually ready to say that it's done. Okay, and then I'm going to add a section here then to kind of introduce it. Exercise tracker. And I could just copy this right from the README for now. I gotta sneeze. One sec. Okay. Sneeze silenced. So let's just see what this looks like. An open source web application that users can use to track their exercises over time. There's a really big space there. Where's that space coming from, I wonder? The sections just have a lot of padding. Makes me think that they should be in the same section. What does this look like? Fine. What if I make this an H2? Looks exactly the same. What if I make it a subtitle? It's not really quite right. This is fine for now. Okay. And the features, I'm also just going to copy from the README, basically. Sign in with GitHub. define your own exercises and track them over time. No. I don't know where that came from. Silly Emmett. Sign in with your GitHub account. Define your own exercises and track them over time. Exercises can be tracked with reps, weight, assistance, assisted weight, duration, distance, and or intensity. Anything else that we want to put in here? I don't know. Mobile friendly UI. Okie doke. Something like that. And then again, if I actually had something to do a decent screenshot of, I would put a screenshot, but there's not. So I'm not going to worry about that right now. And, you know, if I responsive view this, it should work fine. Yep. In fact, it arguably looks better in the responsive view, which is no surprise. Some landing page updates. Okay. Time check. 8 minutes left. Not really a ton of time left. Let's look back at our notes here. I think I'm going to say landing page is done for now. There's definitely still, I'll make a note here as well, like add screenshots and details to landing page. Certainly not finished, but at least it's got something, right? And I think we did this. And we did this. Okay, so let's see here. Maybe I will actually do this, allow users to choose arbitrary dates in the past, just because it should be a fairly simple feature to implement, I think. We're going to need to take advantage of the browser's built-in date picker input type, which would be date. So like if somebody clicks on this, you know, it is what it is, right? So that would be in the today page. I'm just going to put it here for now. Input, type, date, ID, date, I guess. Name, date. And I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do with this input value. So there's a couple options. One is we could have this be, we could have like an on-change JavaScript handler where it's like, hey, when it changes, you know, send the user to this other page. Or we could maybe have this be like a form submission handler is the other thing that I'm thinking. And the form could automatically do the sending us to another page without any JavaScript. Maybe. But then I'm thinking the problem with that is the form action needs to be a fixed URL. So it would need to like redirect the user to some page on the back end that would then need to parse the form query parameters, parse out the date, and put that into the proper place in the URL, which is a bit odd. If we had designed our app a bit differently and actually made the date a query parameter to begin with, then the form submission thing would work better. Well, we didn't, and I don't know if I want to change that right now. So I'm just going to use an input handler. And the current value for this is today. Anything else I need to put in here? Min, max, max today, I guess. It's not really, the max isn't really today though, is it? This is where we're getting into a bit of a thing. This today variable is not named properly. Let's just rename that to minimize confusion here. Can I do, I can't use the rename symbol in Pug, but I can do a find and replace. So today is going to be called date, I guess. And that's only going to be the exact matches. Date, okay. And then this max is actually going to be today. And then this is today could just be date equals today or date not equals today in this case, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We can keep using is today. And then up here, so this is going to be called date instead. And then we're going to have a different thing called today, which is just today, I guess. And kind of the idea here is like, if we're looking at today, it makes sense to call that date today. But if we're looking at a previous day, then today and the previous day are actually different, right? So let's inspect this here, see what we're talking about. Here, the value and the max are the same. If I go to one day in the past and inspect it again, the value and the max are different. So now, like if I choose this, it's not going to let me pick anything after like the actual today. And I can pick this today button. That's convenient as well. So it's easy to go back to today. Exactly what this looks like is going to depend on the browser though, right? Like this is the Firefox rendered date viewer. If you're in, or this is a Chrome rendered date viewer, I guess. I'm using Chrome. If you're using Firefox, like it would probably look different and so on. So we can't necessarily assume it's going to look exactly like that for everybody. But that's fine. And the min, there is no min really. Okay. So then we need to add a handler that's going to detect when that value changes and send the user to the new URL. And we're going to do that with like a data on change something. Like this would be let's look at the data star docs again. Data on change. And then there's like this. So also this data on load, for example, this is totally unrelated, but in this exercise page here, instead of having this script, I could put like data on load as a property on these canvas things to call this function. But what I have here should work fine. So we're just going to stick with that. Anyway, so we're going to do data on change, and then it's going to be like event.target.value or something like that, right? Console.log event.target.value. So suppose I pick a date, I get that date logged. Okay, so now instead of logging it, right, we're going to redirect the page. So location.pathname equals slash, let's do this way, slash event.target.value. And so now if I pick some other date, I have to refresh my page maybe. If I pick some other date, it's not actually sending me though. Oh, right, path name. Actually have to assign it to the right value. I'm going to keep the window in there just to be extra explicit though. Okay, so now like if I pick a date, I'm going to be taken to that page. Pretty simple. Let's commit these. Renaming that value, adding this thing, and updating that date to use the new date parameter. So just to double check, if I'm like on the 3rd here, and I add a rep or an exercise, it gets added to the 3rd correctly. Okay. And if I go to today, the arrow's gone. Okay, cool. Seems like that's working. So add date picker to today page. And we can check that off our notes. Again, not pretty, but the functionality is there. Okay. With that, I think I'm going to call it a wrap. Let's push our commits. Okie doke. And I guess that's it. Thanks, y'all. See you next week.